One day, my wife's old boyfriend called me up and said she was in the shower. Then he told me thank you. And no, not for what you're thinking, but for something else. But what happened next? That shocked me even more. Let me tell you. My name is Adam Becker. I work as a claims adjuster for Universal Beneficial Amalgamated Insurance. Never heard of us? Yeah, I figured. We're basically a middleman for hundreds of tiny, independent insurance companies. I've been here for 23 years and never once thought about switching jobs. It's dull, predictable, just the way I like it. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not miserable or depressed. I just don't have much drive for anything beyond routine. My personal life mirrors my career. Steady, uneventful, and, if I'm being honest, disappointing. I've been married for 24 years to my wife, Ella, and we have twin daughters, Rose and Ida. They're both seniors at Albright College. I also have a 4-bedroom house, which came with an oversized mortgage, mostly thanks to those college expenses. Ella, my wife, has never worked. Not because she couldn't, but because she never wanted to. She's always had a way of making it clear that working was beneath her. Our income has been enough to get by, but never more than that. Despite managing to save about $40,000 over the years, my marriage has been lukewarm at best. I always hoped for more. Some spark, some warmth, but it never came. I tried everything to liven things up, but no matter what I did, Ella remained indifferent. Today, I finally understood why. It was a regular day at UBAI, boring as hell. Just after lunch, my phone rang. It was Ella's number. That was odd. She rarely called me at work. Hello? Adam, old buddy. How's life treating you? It's been years. The voice on the other end was way too familiar, but I couldn't place it. Who is this? And why are you using my wife's phone? Come on, Adam. It's Joseph. Joseph Douglas. You remember me, don't you? The guy you stole Ella from? What was it, 25 years ago? Oh, I remembered. But stole wasn't the right word. He skipped town, and I ended up with her. As far as I was concerned, she was fair game. Yeah, I remember, I said flatly. Now tell me, what the hell are you doing with her phone? He chuckled. Well, Adam, funny story. I was in town for business, gave Ella a call, and we decided to grab lunch. One thing led to another, and well, we ended up back at my hotel room. She's in the shower right now, so I figured I'd give you a call, just to catch up. I gripped the phone tighter. What the hell are you saying? She said she wanted to freshen up before heading home so you wouldn't notice anything. He laughed. You want to hear something really funny, Adam? Listen to this. There was a pause, then the distant hum of a motor. It was faint, but I couldn't quite place it. Did you hear that, Adam? Joseph asked, amused. That was a hairdryer. Can you believe it? She actually brought a mini hairdryer to our little reunion. What does that tell you, Adam? I clenched my jaw. What do you want, Joseph? Why are you calling me? Just wanted to say thanks. His voice was dripping with arrogance. Thanks for taking her off my hands. But let's be real. You never really had her. She's still mine. Otherwise, why would she be here? I hung up and immediately blocked the number. I didn't need to hear anything else. That call explained everything. The coldness, the distance, the indifference. Within an hour, I had quit my job. I had my salary and vacation pay forwarded to my brother in Huntsville. Then, I went straight to the bank and emptied out every account. I didn't touch the mortgage. Didn't bother paying off the credit cards either. I even had my first-class mail redirected to my brother's address. By the time I finished packing up my things, Ella walked in. Her eyes darted to my car, crammed with boxes. Adam, what's going on? Why is all your stuff in the car? I sat at the kitchen table, calmly sipping the last of my coffee as she set a few grocery bags on the counter. Oh, you noticed. She hesitated, watching me carefully as she started unloading the bags. Then, halfway through, she stopped and turned, arms crossed. Are you going to tell me what's happening? I didn't answer. Instead, I got up, walked to the counter, and reached into her purse. My fingers found what I was looking for, the bright red, metallic mini hairdryer. I pulled it out and held it up, letting it dangle in front of her. She stood there, frozen. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, with a deep sigh, She turned and walked out of the room. 5 minutes later, I was on the highway, heading for Huntsville. My brother Levi and his wife, Clara, were happy to see me. It had been years since we last got together. Levi and I caught up for a while as Clara busied herself in the kitchen, putting supper together. I told him everything that had happened, laying it all out without any dramatic breakdowns. He seemed surprised by how calmly I was handling it. I was exhausted from the long drive, so after dinner, I went straight to bed. By the time I woke up the next morning, Levi was already gone, off to his job at the Toyota plant just north of town. Clara, always the helpful type, offered to drive me around and help me get settled. It didn't take much. I got a new driver's license, arranged for my mail to be sent to Levi's house, and then we headed to CarMax. 20 minutes later, I walked out with a check for my Honda CR-V. As soon as Levi got off work, we made our way to Rocket City RV Center. I wasn't in a rush to buy anything fancy, so after several hours of browsing, I finally settled on a small Rialta. It was simple, practical, exactly what I needed. Clara and I grabbed lunch at Olive Garden, and by the next day, the dealership had my new home on wheels ready to go. The sales rep spent a couple of hours walking me through how everything worked, from maintenance to operation. I took it as is, except for replacing all 4 tires. Clara was practically giddy about helping me set up my new space, throwing in suggestions for kitchen necessities, storage solutions, and even a few homey touches I hadn't considered. Levi, ever the practical one, put together a small toolkit from his overflowing garage, figuring I'd need it on the road. The next morning, I was gone. No plan, no destination, just the open road and whatever came next. I didn't need a rigid itinerary. I was easygoing, but not reckless. I avoided big cities during rush hour, steered clear of bad weather, and kept my distance from trouble. I wasn't looking for problems, and I sure as hell wasn't inviting any. For the first 2 weeks, I just drove. I followed online lists of free overnight parking spots for nomads, figuring I'd eventually try all 15 of them before the year was up. But there was one problem. At the rate I was going, I'd burned through most of my cash on gas alone. I wasn't planning on settling down anywhere, but I knew I needed to find something to keep money coming in. By mid-July, I found myself in South Dakota, not by choice, just by circumstance. I'd always heard about Sturgis, but since I never cared for motorcycles, I never paid much attention to it. That changed when I stopped at my 3rd overnight spot. They offered free parking, free meals, and some under-the-table cash if I stayed for the month. I had zero bartending experience, so they put me in the kitchen. At first, I just ran the clipper, but soon enough, I was doing small prep work. It was fast-paced, a little chaotic, but surprisingly exhilarating. The Sturgis rally itself only lasted 10 days, but things ramped up weeks before and stretched on for a while after. I worked every day, long hours, but it felt good. By the time the month was over, I had picked up enough skills to handle most fast food style cooking, though I wouldn't dare call myself a chef. I stayed on an extra week after the rally ended, then headed west. 2 weeks later, I landed another cooking job, this time at a camping resort near Cody, Wyoming. It was the same deal, free parking, free meals, and a bit of off-the-books cash. No complaints there. I stuck around for 3 months. The work was steady, and I was getting better at it. But as the temperatures started dropping, I knew it was time to move on. The owners were happy with my work and asked me to return in the spring. I agreed. It never hurt to have a backup plan. As I pulled away, the last sign I saw mentioned something about Shoshone National Forest. Beyond that, I had no idea where the hell I was. But the day was nice, and I found what looked like a designated parking spot, quiet and away from traffic noise. With nowhere pressing to be, I decided to stay for a few days, or at least until someone told me to move along. That was when I met Mason. I was sitting outside, enjoying the sunset, when he wandered up to my camper. He was older, rough around the edges, but not in a way that suggested he was homeless or down on his luck. He sniffed the air. "That coffee smells good. Got an extra cup?" I nodded, poured him one, and grabbed a folding chair from under the Rialta. "I'm Adam, like the king." He smirked, taking a sip of coffee. "Mason, not like any king I know." He chuckled at his own joke. I just smiled, curious about the man who had appeared out of nowhere. Mason and I sat for a while, talking about nothing in particular. The weather, the view, small talk to pass the time. "Where's your car, Mason?" I finally asked. "Don't have one. I was walking." His short, clipped answers were starting to get on my nerves. "Walking from where?" "From home." I exhaled, already frustrated. "Is it close?" "No, not really. I've been walking for 2 days now." That made me pause. "You hungry?" "Yeah, I could eat. But don't go to any trouble." One thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was fixing him a meal. By the time we finished eating, it was getting late, so I let him stay in the RV for the night. The next morning, we had a slow, easy breakfast, drinking coffee and chatting about whatever came to mind. "Mason, does anyone even know where you are?" I asked. "Oh yeah, my granddaughter, Mia. She always knows." "Isn't she worried?" "Why would she be? I always come home." I had nothing to say to that. There was something both oddly reassuring and slightly concerning about his confidence. Mason stretched and set his coffee cup down. "You know, Adam, maybe I should head home. I could use some fresh socks and a change of underwear." I smirked. "Yeah, and a bath and a shave wouldn't hurt either, old man." 30 minutes later, we were on the road. The only city sign I noticed said Lander, but I still wasn't entirely sure where I was. I really should have gotten a GPS before setting off in the RV. Maybe I'd pick one up for Christmas. After what felt like an endless list of driving directions from Mason, we finally pulled up to his home. It was a cabin-like structure, part stone, part log, with a rugged, picturesque feel to it. The kind of place you'd see on the cover of a magazine titled Off-Grid Living. Standing on the porch, waiting for us, was a tall woman with bronze skin and dark hair, dressed in loose jeans and a flannel shirt. It was like she had been expecting us. "Thank you for bringing Saba home. I was afraid I'd have to go fetch him myself." The term Saba caught my attention. "You knew where he was?" I asked. "Of course. I always know where he is. I have a tracker sewn into his jacket. The battery lasts about a week, but I usually get him back after 3 days or so." I raised an eyebrow. "Does he have dementia? Is that why he wanders?" She shook her head. "No, he's fine. We've had him checked several times. He just likes to walk in the woods. He's been doing it for 2 years now, and it's never been a problem. If I try to stop him, though, that would be a problem." I nodded, starting to understand. "I'm Adam, by the way. Looks like I saved you a trip." "Mia," she said, shaking my hand. "Mason's my grandfather. I appreciate you bringing him back. Or did I already say that? Anyway, come on in. I've got hot coffee and cold beer. Take your pick." Mason had already disappeared into the house, probably straight to the shower. I followed Mia inside, and we sat and talked for a while until Mason re-emerged, freshly showered and shaved, looking years younger. Mia made lunch, and for the first time in months, I had a real sit-down meal at an actual table. It felt strange, but in a good way. After lunch, Mason vanished again, leaving me with Mia. She offered me a tour of the property, and I took her up on it. They own 640 acres, most of it dense forest and mountainous terrain. Not much good for farming or ranching, but damn, was it beautiful. Mia and I got along surprisingly well. Before I even realized what was happening, I found myself staying for dinner. Then she offered me a hot shower and a real bed for the night. A month later, I was still there. The winter hit hard. Mason hated the snow, so he spent most of his time inside, carving. He had a talent for making walking canes, each one with a unique design or an intricately carved handle. He only used wood from their land, and I often went with him, when the weather allowed, to help him find the perfect pieces. As we scavenged through the property, something else caught my eye: the sheer number of cottonwood trees. I knew that cottonwood bark carving was becoming popular, but Mason only cared about his canes. Mia, on the other hand, had her own creative outlet. She wrote romance novels, a lot of them. Turns out she had a knack for it. She had over 35 Bodice Ripper ebooks listed on Amazon and a few other platforms. Cheap reads, but she had a loyal following, and every new book sold as soon as she posted it. As for me, I earned my keep by tackling years' worth of overdue maintenance on the house and outbuildings. It seemed like a never-ending project. The property's previous owners had kept horses, so there was a full-sized barn behind the house. But Mason and Mia weren't horse people. The barn was empty, so I parked the Rialto inside next to an ATV that looked like it had never been used. It took me half a day to get the ATV serviced and running again. But I had an idea, and I needed to run it by Mia first. I found her at her desk, typing away on her computer. "Mia, we need to talk." Without missing a beat, she leaned back dramatically, resting the back of her hand against her forehead. Then she let out an exaggerated moan. I just stood there, confused. What the hell was that? She smirked. "Relax, Adam. It's a joke." In romance novels, whenever a couple has an issue, especially a sexual one, it always starts with "we need to talk." That's when one of them confesses something terrible, like cheating, or some dark secret that ruins everything. Usually, one person is devastated, and the other is either cold, indifferent, or out for revenge. You'd be surprised how many directions that can go. I raised an eyebrow. "I just wanted to borrow the ATV." She sighed dramatically. "Well, that's a letdown. I was hoping for something more scandalous." She was grinning, and for the first time in a long while, so was I. "Want a beer?" Mason was sitting by the fireplace, carving as usual. Mia had set up a chair with a canvas tarp underneath to catch the wood shavings. In the summer, she made him sit on the porch for his carving sessions. But now, with the cold settling in, she allowed him the comfort of the indoors. She looked at me. "So, what do you need the ATV for?" I spent the next hour laying out my plan. I had secured agreements with 3 distributors willing to buy all the cottonwood bark I could supply at wholesale prices. There was more than enough on the property, far more than Mason would ever use for his canes. We'd only be harvesting from dead trees, and there were plenty of those to keep us busy for years. The only real obstacle was shipping. There wasn't a practical or affordable way to transport the bark in bulk. Mia didn't hesitate. "Do whatever you want. Take Mason with you if he's up for it." Mason, who had been listening quietly, perked up. "Hell, yes. Sounds like something to keep me busy." And just like that, we had a project. The shipping issue would have to wait, but as soon as the worst of the cold passed, Mason and I got to work. We started with the easiest trees first, the ones closest to the barn and easy to reach. The biggest hassle was how many trips we had to make. The ATV's utility cart had a tiny capacity, so we were constantly hauling loads back and forth. Mason didn't mind, though. He was more than happy to be the designated driver. Thankfully, the barn was big enough to store as much as we could gather. Once it started filling up, we slowed down our collecting. The hard work did us both good. We were sleeping better, feeling better. Oddly enough, in all this time, Mia and I had never talked about our personal lives. She never asked about mine, and I never pried into hers. It seemed like an unspoken rule between us. We each had our pasts, and we both preferred to leave them alone. But after all these months, I figured I should at least reach out to my daughters. I no longer had a phone, so I had to borrow Mia's. I dialed. It rang twice. "Rose, it's your father." There was a sharp inhale. "Dad? My God. Where the hell have you been? We've been worried sick. Mom is beside herself. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, honey. Really, I am. I just needed to get away for a while. I was afraid I'd do something I'd regret if I stayed." "Did Mom tell you that?" she snapped. "She didn't explain?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "Mom said she came home one day, put the groceries away, and then you threw a fit and stormed out of the house. She hasn't seen or heard from you since." I let that sink in. "That's all she told you?" "Yep. She sat around for a couple of months, then got a job stocking shelves at Target. Night shift pays more, and she needed the money. She's struggling, barely keeping the utilities on. The bank's been harassing her about the mortgage." My jaw tightened. Typical. Ella could have told them the truth, but instead, she painted herself as the victim. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" I exhaled. I could take the high road and say your mother should be the one to tell you the truth, but at this point, it's a little late for that. There was silence on the other end. "Your mother cheated on me." "That's nonsense. I don't believe that. How do you even know? And with who?" I didn't sugarcoat it. "His name's Joseph Douglas. An old boyfriend. They spent the afternoon together in his hotel room. When she was in the shower, he used her phone to call me and brag about it. There was a long pause. And when she got home, I confronted her. She didn't deny it, didn't fight, didn't explain, just turned and walked out of the room. That's when I left. What do you mean? Sort of confronted her? Rose pressed. I sighed. She took her hairdryer with her to meet him. What? Think about it. Who brings a hairdryer to meet an old friend? It wasn't accidental, Rose. She planned it. She knew exactly what she was doing. Rose's voice was tense. Damn, Dad. Ida and I are going to see her this weekend. We're getting to the bottom of this. I wouldn't count on an honest answer. Can I call you back at this number? No. It belongs to a friend. After we hang up, I'm blocking your number. I'll call you in a month or so. A pause. Then, okay. Take care of yourself, Dad. Bye. I hung up and handed the phone back to Mia. I hadn't noticed she was standing nearby. She must have heard the entire conversation, or at least my side of it. That night, after Mason turned in, we sat in front of the fireplace, drinking wine and eating popcorn. The fire crackled softly, filling the cabin with warmth. It was my job to keep the firewood stocked, so I had gotten pretty good at it. After a long silence, Mia spoke. I'm sorry about what happened between you and your wife. I glanced at her. You overheard? She gave me a small shrug. I couldn't help it. There was no pity in her voice, no empty platitudes, just quiet understanding. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't mind that someone else knew. I think I understand, Mia said, but I don't want to pry. It's okay, I replied. She cheated, and I left. Not much else to it. She nodded, then tilted her head. Now that that's out in the open, what about you? What's a beautiful, vibrant, young Jewish girl doing hiding in Wyoming? She laughed. Wow, you missed 3 out of 4 there. I'm not beautiful, not vibrant, and not hiding. I am Jewish, though, if that even matters. I smirked. You're dodging the question. She let out a long sigh. My husband cheated on me, and then he met a tragic end. I blinked. What the hell does that mean? She leaned in close, whispering just beside my ear. Mason ended the jerk. For a second, I thought I heard her giggle. And just like that, I understood. That's why they were in Wyoming. Mason wasn't here for the fresh air. He was in hiding. And she was here to take care of him. Not a bad setup. We never did figure out a cost-effective way to ship the barkwood. Or rather, we lost interest in even trying. After my initial conversations with a few distributors, I just let it go. I had no real reason to push for it. But that didn't stop Mason and me from continuing to harvest it. The work became part of our routine, something calming, almost therapeutic. One day, instead of collecting, we decided to clear a few access trails to make it easier to reach the more remote trees. We spent the entire day hacking away at overgrowth, cutting fallen branches, and smoothing out rough paths. By the time we got back to the house, both of us were exhausted. And then we noticed something. The barn, where we had been storing all that barkwood, was empty. Mia stood on the porch, smiling as we dragged ourselves up the steps. She had 2 beers ready for us, though the cool air outside almost made me wish for coffee instead. I frowned. What happened? She grinned. 2 guys from Smoky Mountain Timber showed up right after you left this morning, with a truck. I showed them the barn. They wrote me a check for $4,800, and by noon, they were gone. I stared at her. You sold the whole lot? She shrugged. I had no idea how much it was worth. Hope I did all right. Mason and I turned to each other and, without thinking, high-fived. It felt strangely funny, high-fiving a 70-year-old New Jersey native over a barkwood deal. But hell, it was found money. You did great, I assured her. Now, we just have to fill the barn up again. A couple of weeks later, I figured it was time to check in with my daughters again. I borrowed Mia's phone and dialed. Hey, Rose. It's your dad. Just wanted to check in, see how things were going. She didn't sound relieved this time. She sounded tense. Not great, Dad. She hesitated. Ida is here. Let me put you on speaker. I braced myself. How bad is not great? A pause. Then, Mom's in jail. I exhaled. Okay, I'm listening. We confronted Mom after our last conversation. She had no idea Joseph called you. She admitted to everything else. She owned up to being there, admitted they shared personal moments together, but swore she didn't know why he would call you. I stayed quiet, waiting for the part that landed her in jail. 2 days later, she was arrested. For what? The neighbors heard what sounded like a gunshot. Joseph's alive, but the damage landed below the belly button. Messed up his plumbing real bad. I was quiet for a long time. Should I come home? I finally asked. No, Rose said immediately. She'll be out on bail in a few days. And honestly, she doesn't want to see you. She regrets what she did, but she won't even talk to us about it, let alone you. I nodded to myself. All right, I'll stay put. I'll check in again later. One more thing, Dad, Rose added hesitantly. She's going to file for divorce. She told us you probably wouldn't, so she figured she'd do it herself. Figures. She wouldn't say anything else about it. Oh, and the bank took the house. I let out a breath. Life goes on. With that chapter officially closed, things settled back into routine. Mia returned to her writing, Mason and I went back to harvesting, and the days passed peacefully. Then Mason hit me with something I wasn't expecting. We were taking a lunch break, resting our legs after a long morning of clearing brush. He set down his sandwich and looked at me seriously. Adam, my good friend, you're not pulling your weight. I almost choked on my water. What are you talking about, old man? I do twice the work you do. He shook his head. I don't mean out here. I mean at the lodge. I frowned. I don't understand. There's not much to do there. But Mason just gave me a knowing look. And somehow, I had the feeling this conversation wasn't about firewood or barkwood at all. Mason's big talk. Mia takes care of everything, I said. And when I try to help, she pushes me away. Mason rolled his eyes. That's not what I mean, damn it. He leaned in, pointing a gnarled finger at me. Adam, Mia is a grown woman. She's in the prime of her life. She needs the comfort of a man. She needs strong arms and a warm body. And guess what? You're the best, actually the only, candidate for the job. It's time for you to step up and be a man. I nearly choked. Damn it, Mason. You're not suggesting what I think you're suggesting, are you? You want me to? What? Sharing special moments with your granddaughter? Mason smirked. Why not? I threw my hands up. Hell, how do you even know if she's attracted to me? She's never said anything? Mason huffed. Of course not, you idiot. She's waiting for you to make the first move. I hesitated. And what if she turns me down? What then? I don't want to leave. I like it here. I don't want to mess anything up. Mason shook his head with absolute certainty. She won't turn you down. Trust me. Now, enough talk. Get back to work. And of course, he was right. There was no grand confession. No big, dramatic moment. That night, Mia and I simply excused ourselves and went to her room. I moved in the next morning. Nothing changed, and yet, everything changed. She was content. I was ecstatic. Mason? He walked around grinning for a week like a man who had personally won the lottery. Winter passed, and as the weather warmed, we settled into a rhythm. Working the bark was hit or miss. Some days were too cold, so we relaxed by the fire. Mason carved his canes. I tried my hand at bark carving, using online tutorials. I went through a ridiculous number of band-aids before I got the hang of it. Mia kept busy writing, and then everything came to a screeching halt. Mason and I had spent the morning marking trees for the next month's harvest. As we crested the hill overlooking the lodge, we saw something that made us stop in our tracks. A state police car and 2 black sedans were parked in front of the house. From our vantage point, we watched as Mia stood on the porch, talking to several men. She was animated, waving her arms, stomping her feet. I frowned. This looks serious. Mason, oddly enough, chuckled. 2 of the men finally convinced her to let them inside. I had no idea what they were looking for, but I was fairly sure it wasn't me. Mason? That was another story. I turned to him. Mason, do you remember the place where we first met? He looked at me, smirked, and nodded. Can you meet me there in 2 days? Another nod. Mason took what little food and water we had with us and vanished over the hill. I had no doubt that Mia had his GPS tracker fully charged. I continued down toward the lodge, playing the part of the dim-witted hired hand. Sure enough, they were looking for Mason. Even Mia had no idea how they had traced him to the lodge. Among the officers were 2 men from New Jersey and 2 federal agents. Apparently, Mia's ex-husband had been someone important. They grilled the hell out of her, but didn't seem the least bit interested in me. That was a relief. After several hours, they left, clearly unhappy. Mia, however, was ecstatic that I hadn't brought Mason back with me. She didn't ask where he was. I didn't tell her. That evening, we took it easy. We kept an eye on the lodge, checking throughout the night to see if anyone was watching. Nothing. The next morning, Mia finally spoke up. "I assume you and Mason have a plan?" She phrased it as a question, but we both knew the answer. I smiled and nodded. "Something I learned from an old man." "Do you have his passport?" I asked. She smiled back, disappeared into the other room, and returned a few minutes later with an Israeli passport and an envelope with $10,000 in cash. By sunrise, Mason was waiting exactly where he was supposed to be. He was hungry, tired, and cold, but otherwise in good spirits. 15 hours later, I dropped him off at Regina International Airport. I offered to walk him in, but he waved me off. "Better if I do it alone," he said. I was sure he was on the no-fly list in the States. After a steak dinner and a good night's sleep, I drove back to the lodge. When I called my daughters, they had news. Ella was in Muncie, serving 5 to 8 years. They didn't give me details. I didn't ask. The good news? I was officially single. Some prison advocate group had helped Ella file for divorce and process it in less than 90 days. I hesitated, but in the end, I gave Rose the lodge's address. I wanted the divorce papers. I didn't see any downside. A few months later, Mia and I got married in Haifa. Mason refused to return to Wyoming for the wedding, but he still managed to give us the ranch as a wedding present. And just like that, my life had gone in a direction I never could have predicted. Either way, one thing's for sure. Sometimes, life falls apart just so it can come back together in ways you never imagined.